Hello folks, this is Pauline and you're on PissedConsumer YouTube channel. For the past few months, the issue of mass layoffs has become increasingly widespread. The highest layoff rate was in January 2023, with about 84,400 employees losing their jobs. Experts warn that the trend is likely to continue as businesses seek to adapt to the changing landscape of the global economy. We invited Brian Creeley, a career coach, the host of the YouTube channel A Life After Layoff, to talk about current mass layoffs in tech industry, the reasons for the layoffs, and to find out if there is a life after a layoff. I would really like to know about your experience, about yourself, about your YouTube channel. Could you please tell us a bit more?
I've spent the last 20 years of my career in human resources, in both human resource management, so actually doing day-to-day human resource work, and in the last 7 years, more focused strictly on recruiting, talent acquisition, in a variety of industries, most recently in the tech industry. So I've got a lot of experience hiring and interviewing and bringing people into organizations, and then also managing the employment experience after that point. The genesis of my channel and the genesis of the company that I founded, which is A Life After Layoff, came about after I experienced a layoff in 2020 as a result of the COVID pandemic. So as we recall, back in 2020, everybody was laying off. Kind of a knee-jerk reaction in the industry, and I was unfortunate to get caught up in that. And I decided at that point in time that I would start this channel in order to help people navigate through major corporations' hiring processes, because there was a lot of, when I was interviewing and hiring people, I noticed that there was a big disconnect between what people were trying to sell themselves with and what hiring managers and what companies were demanding or looking for. And I thought it was just an opportunity, something I had been thinking about for a long time, helping people write resumes and things like that. But I wanted to take it a step further and really give them the tools necessary to feel confident and give them an insider's perspective. Because if I would interview somebody that really struggled, I would sometimes pull them aside and say, like, hey, we're not going to hire you, but you might want to consider doing this or doing that. And that way, the next interview you have with another company might go a little smoother. And that was kind of the reason why I decided to start it. So I got laid off, and then within like 2 days decided to start a website and a YouTube channel and started making content. And it really took off over 2020 into 2021. And people really seemed to resonate with what I was saying. It's just continued to grow. And unfortunately, in today's economy or today's market, especially in tech, we're seeing a major uptick in layoffs. So I'm seeing continued interest in what I'm trying to bring to the table as far as insider information. So it's really to give people kind of to peel back the curtain behind major corporations' hiring processes and show them how corporations hire, and hopefully give them tools to be able to more strategically position themselves to be viewed as the best possible fit and to get those jobs. But it's kind of even takes a step beyond just traditional, like, here's how you get a job, here's how you interview, but it's really more talking about giving people the tools and a different mindset of how they view their career to be more, I call it a lot on my channel, of acting like a free agent or acting like the CEO of your own career, because most people are completely dependent upon an employer. And we've learned over the last 3 years that this loyalty arrangement, or this relationship between employee and employer can be one-sided at times. And trying to give people the mentality of you have to think and you have to act for what's in your best interest first and foremost, and then a company secondary. And it's not to say that you shouldn't be loyal to a company, but you should be loyal to yourself first and doing what's right for you first and foremost. And I think that that's one of the messages that has resonated with my audience. is getting people to not only have the tools to position themselves to be the best possible fit for these jobs, but also to know why are they even applying for these jobs to begin with, and what are they trying to achieve in their career, and not letting an employer dictate the course of direction that they go in. They should be very calculated in why they're working in the jobs that they're working in, why they're being pulled in certain directions, and if an employer is asking them to do something that's not consistent with what their career path should be, then they need to take ownership of it and be the CEO. So that's kind of the story of a life after layoff and how I got where I am today. But going to continue to do this. This is truly my passion. As much as I loved HR, this is what I love to do: is helping people and making a difference. And I'm seeing a tangible result from that.
Great, Brian. Thank you very much for such an interesting story for your own way. It was really interesting to hear this. Wow, I really like the phrase you said, being a CEO of your career. So you can say that you have to become a CEO of your own life. I also would like to know. Um, there is like a big wave of layoffs that hit the giants like Google, Amazon, Microsoft. Tens of thousands of people ended up being unemployed. And why do successful companies like this take this step? And what are the reasons?
I mean, the ultimate reason any company does this is shareholder value. I mean, they're looking to make their stock prices as attractive as possible, and even in situations where they're maybe not losing money, they're trying to lean out so that they can get as much productivity out of their existing workforce as they can. And unfortunately, layoffs are one of the ways that they do that. And I think how this current round of layoffs happened is you have to look at the market from, there's a power dynamic at play. There's a pendulum that swings back and forth. And sometimes it's in the employee. The employee has the power. Sometimes the employer has the power. Fortunately for the employee, the employer normally has the power historically, but the pendulum swings back and forth. And in 2020, the pendulum, as this, we were in a pretty decent labor market before 2020, 2019, 2018, things were going pretty well. At the end of 2019, things started to slow down even before the pandemic came along. And then the pandemic came, and it was almost like these employers use that as an excuse to right size their organizations. And typically you'll see every 10 years or so, you'll see a big global event that will happen that will allow companies to right size. So we had in the United States in 2008, we had, was probably the last major one. We had the subprime mortgage crisis, where mortgage prices and housing went skyrocketing to the point where it was a bubble. The bubble burst, and all these companies decided to lay off. They used it as an excuse, even if they weren't related to the mortgage industry. They still used it as an excuse to lay off. We saw it previous to that at 9/11 with the terrorist attack and all that stuff. That created another bubble that they used, and it was like this the tech bubble at that point in time in 2000 as well. All that kind of stuff came to fruition. There was the huge layoffs that happened then. So it's about every 10 years or so that they use these big events to make as an excuse to lay off people. In 2019, the market kept on going up and up and up and up, which wages and salary growth and all that stuff kind of going up and up and up. And companies tend to bloat in size. They add divisions, they add people, and they look for opportunities, like excuses, if you will, to lay off. And then the pandemic came. That was a really convenient one. And as you noticed, the employment pendulum kind of swinging back and forth. It was in the employee side a little bit, but then it really swung heavily to the employer side. And they all said, whoa, we're going to lay off all these people. We don't know what's going to happen with our demand. Everything's shutting down. The economy's shutting down. Businesses are shutting down. So they used it as I would say a knee-jerk reaction to the pandemic. But I also think behind that was a strategic decision to use it as an opportunity to cut the right size for shareholder value. And all these people got laid off. And in some cases, companies made these decisions before they even knew what was happening in their business. They just said, well, we're going to lay off. Well, they're laying off and they're laying off and they are laying off. So we can lay off and not be the bad guy. We can just kind of do what everybody else is doing and kind of blend in with the background. But what happened was, once the economy turned back on, the demand for all these products was basically backlogged for a year. And suddenly we had demand for everything, like in the automotive with the chip manufacturers, people buying houses. Suddenly everybody seemed to need a house, which I always kind of scratched my head and said, where were people living before 2020? But apparently everybody needed a house. At the same time, everybody needed cars. I actually had to buy a car during the pandemic. It wasn't it, like my car died and I had to buy a new one, but and it was difficult to find a car. But all of these products kind of created a backlog. We had this logistical issues with the ports. You couldn't get material in. So basically, all these companies realized they cut all this workforce, and now they're scrambling to go back and start hiring. And they hired feverishly, which then the pendulum swung by law of supply and demand. The pendulum swung way back into the employee side, and it was like kind of like the golden era for the employee, especially in tech, but basically every industry. But tech was really kind of at the forefront of it, where suddenly, if you're in the technical role, in particular software developing, you couldn't trip out your front door without three or four offers that were 50%, 80%, 100% more than what you were earning today. And so that pendulum swung very hard into the employee side. Bidding wars. It was the golden era. It was the best time to be an employee probably in the last 50 years. I'm sitting here watching this trend going, this is not sustainable. This is not going to end well because I've seen the employment pendulum swinging back and forth. And the last year of this market has been very buried this way after being buried. That's almost like you're getting whiplash looking back and forth. It's like watching a tennis match going back and forth and back and forth. And sure enough, there was a crack in the dam somewhere along the line, somewhere in 2022. And it's like they all wait for the first employer to announce a layoff. And then once that one announces layoff, then they all start coming out with their own layoffs, even though their business might be just fine. They're suddenly looking at their labor costs, which have skyrocketed. I mean, when you were paying a software developer $100,000 a year in 2020, now they're earning 250,000 a year later with essentially the same skill. That's not probably a sustainable business model over the long term, and they're all over hiring because they don't. The planning is what I have an issue with. The planning of their businesses is an issue, but they overhired. These huge tech firms were just hiring as many people as they could, just scooping them all up and then throwing all this ridiculous money at them. And great for the employee. I'll never fault an employee for getting as much money as they can, but you have to look at it logically and say this is probably not a sustainable model. This is not going to end well. And sure enough, again, the first employer, sometime, I don't know who the first employer who led like the tip of the spear, who led the charge, somebody started laying off without it being an issue, a legit business issue. They just wanted to cut their costs down because they realized they probably couldn't sustain this. But then the next one goes, then the next one goes, and before you know it, every single tech firm, even if they're doing, fine, their business model is fine, is laying off. And now it's like, if you're a tech firm that isn't laying off, then you're not in the club, right? Everybody's gotten laid. So this has been a whiplash back the other way for the employer on the pendulum that swings back and forth of the pendulum of employment power, right? So now we've got all these companies that are laying off, and these employees who finally felt like they had their day in the sun, like they finally felt like they had some power, and that got like ripped away from them as fast as they got it. And now it's back into this a not so great labor market. Now I don't know how deep these cuts are going to go, and how long it's going to last, or if it'll spread. I tend to think that, and I don't like to be a pessimist, but I tend to think that we haven't seen the last of it. I think over the next 12 to 18 months, I think we're going to start to see it hit other industries. But the fact is that there's a lot of people now that are unemployed and looking for work, and there's not as many jobs. The good news is that there are still people getting hired. That's the good news. But the bad news is there's a lot more competition for those jobs. But why these companies are doing this, it's mainly for shareholder value, and I think on some level trying to get control back of the employment pendulum. Ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're not writing your own paycheck, you don't control the employment situation. Whoever is but signing their name on the paycheck that's coming to your account. That's who controls the dynamic. And I think people have learned a little bit the hard way over the last 8 months or so that that's the case.
Great, I see. And I have a question. These massive layoffs that are going right now, is there like a result of a pandemic still, or there's something else behind this?
Well, it's from the pandemic, had all this pent up demand. These employers overhired because of the pent up demand, and they didn't plan properly. And it's kind of like they created the problem, and then they created a solution which created another problem, and now they're trying to correct for that. They basically overhired as a result of 2020, and overhired and overpaid for their talent. And now they're trying to right size that because they realize that it's going to cut into shareholder value. I mean, the shareholder, when your labor costs are double and triple what they were a year ago, and your profits haven't achieved the same level of growth, obviously shareholders who own that stock are going to look at that and say, we want more responsibility in the hiring. And I'll be the first to admit, there probably was a lack of responsibility in how companies hired. They hired recklessly in a lot of cases. They threw a lot of money at people that probably, again, I'll never fault somebody for getting as much money as they can, but they probably overpaid for talent and realized that that was not a sustainable business model. So I think that's why we're seeing the layoffs happening now.
So right now they're trying like to justify that expenses, right?
Yeah, we're trying to right size themselves and trying to correct the problem, the hiring problem they created in 2021, 2022, in the early part of 2022.
Okay, I see. So as you mentioned before, you said that this is gonna last at least for 12, 18 months, right?
I think so. I mean, I'm not an economist, so this is just me reading the tea leaves, so to speak. But I don't think that I think that once you open up the the Pandora's box of layoffs, other companies starting to see it more in like financial services. I'm seeing large banks starting to announce layoffs. It's starting to slip into more like consulting and big consulting and that's that sort of thing. I kind of read the headlines on LinkedIn pretty closely about who's laying off, and it's now starting to trickle into other industries just beyond just tech. Seems like tech has slowing down. The layoffs are slowing down in tech, but now it's starting to hit, like Disney. I think just announced a big layoff. So it's in entertainment and other places, and I think employers will never let a good crisis go to waste. Right? They'll use that as an opportunity to right size their organization. So if you're an employee and really if you're an employee in any organization, I would be taking proactive steps to protect myself now.
Okay, so here's the next question going. And how can you protect yourself from being laid off, and what are the mechanisms in place?
I think if it's me, I'm looking around my organization and trying to determine whether or not I sit in a division or a job type that actively adds or supports revenue growth. Is it a new division if I'm working in a new division or a new product that's trying to be launched, I would probably be concerned, because those are typically the roles that they would look to cut first, is positions that are not actively adding to the bottom line. Um, Unfortunately, if I look around and I see people that are not really that busy in my department, I'm probably concerned. That's another area. Recruiters got hit real hard. So if you're not adding growth, if I'm a recruiter, I'm probably pretty nervous right now. A lot of recruiters are on the market. Um, I think people who are relatively low skilled and easily replaceable on the market, especially if you're, and this is no offense to people who are earlier in their career, but it's just kind of the nature of it with software developers, for example. I was seeing because I was recruiting software developers, and we were seeing software developers with very little on the spectrum of low skilled, but also demanding top wages. And if I'm somebody that got a really nice offer but didn't really have the skill to back it up, in other words, I wouldn't have gotten that same job in 2019, I probably would be concerned as well, looking at my skill, saying, "Am I earning the money does my skill suggest that I deserve this money based on other people in similar roles. So I would be looking at making sure that I'm upskilling, being as valuable as I can to a business, and I would be trying to get into a role that supports a core function of a business. So I would get into one of their main product lines. Secondly, so if I'm upskilling myself and making myself more valuable, the second thing that I would do is I would make sure I'm building my networks. Network building right now is something that you don't want to wait until you get a call from human resources that your job is being eliminated to start not actively networking. Same thing goes with your resume. You don't want to wait until you need it to start scrambling, because all the pressure that's on you and all the emotions that you're going through trying to write a resume, trying to build networks with the right people is just, it's too much. There's a lot of stress there. So you're better off having all that stuff in order now. We have to act like a free agent as an employee. We always have to be thinking of the CEO. A CEO doesn't wait till something bad happens. They always have a contingency plan in place. It's not to say that you should be approaching your career defensively constantly, because that's not a way to live either, but you should also be pragmatic and think, what will happen if I lose my job? And for me, one of the biggest things that I did, because I asked that question, what would happen if I lost my job? And unfortunately, I did lose my job a few years ago. Making sure that you're not dependent upon one source of income. So if you are fully reliant on a single job to pay for all of your mortgage, your house, your food, your car, your all the stuff that you need to survive, that's a huge threat. You should be really thinking about, how do I start to de-risk my lifestyle so that I'm not fully dependent on one employer. So for me, multiple streams of income is a critical component to surviving and thriving in an environment where everybody's getting laid off. So if I haven't started building multiple streams of income, I'm looking for ways. And it doesn't mean you have to be a business owner. It doesn't mean you have to start a business, but there are a lot of creative ways, especially in today's economy, in today's market, with the advent of social media and what it can do, that you can make a very reasonable, and I'm talking very reasonable income on the side that can protect you and your family. So that's what I would be doing if I was in a situation where I was not sure or not feeling very comfortable.
Yeah, you're right. Thank you very much for such important and valuable tips. And I hope I hope I'll be prepared when this gonna happen to me. I'm building my network, yes.
And there's a right way to build a network too. It's network building is not just let me connect with people that I know from my previous jobs on LinkedIn, and because those are not people that generally have opportunities for you. You might get a person that you used to work with who has a job opportunity at their new company, but the way you build approach networking shouldn't it's not effective to just go in, and the person that you go to your church with or the person that you went to school with, they may help, but they're realistically not going to help you when you need them. You're better off building targeted networks of people who actually have jobs or would hire you versus people that you currently know who may or may not. So building the right kind of networks is important. It's not just let's go and do a bunch of network activities that build networks that are not targeted. But yeah, I would start building your networks today. Work on side hustles, all
Yeah,
that stuff.
correct.
Because I don't think I've met a single person who got laid off recently who wasn't surprised and shocked and didn't think that they would happen. It's kind of like, well, this wouldn't happen to me, and it catches people off guard, even when they think intuitively, look around and they say, well, there's a lot of people in my industry that are getting laid off, but it's not going to happen to me. I'm too valuable. Everybody thinks they're too valuable. And what I've learned the hard way myself is nobody's replaceable. Nobody's irreplaceable. Everybody has, you think that the company's going to shut down. If I'm not here, the company will shut down tomorrow. And guess what? A month later, they're still ticking away. And, you know, it's kind of like an ego hit for a lot of people, but it's the truth. It's the ugly reality of your career. You're always replaceable. There's always somebody else that could do your job cheaper and faster.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes, that's true. But I mean, for real, there are specialists that are irreplaceable, I think so.
Yeah. And that's if you can find that skill in your chosen career path, be as irreplaceable as you can. Get the skill that nobody else has or very few people have, and make yourself as marketable as you can. that's part of your career strategy. It should be, if you do the same job that hundreds of other people can do, no offense to my recruiter friends, but we all have the same competency. Basically, I'm not naive enough to think that somebody else couldn't do my recruiting job, but how do you differentiate yourself and your chosen career path? And for some of us, like recruiters, there's a lot of them that are making a decision to switch out of recruiting because it's too much like this. Times are great. Everybody needs recruiters. Then the first time, the first minute that things dip, guess who's the first to go? It's a recruiter. And that's not a fun way to live your life. If you want job stability, don't be a recruiter.
Okay, great. I won't be. Also, very interesting moment. Such term as quiet hiring. What is this, and will this practice spread in the future, and how long it's gonna last?
And quiet hiring is not a new concept. It's been around for a long time. It's basically companies trying to get the most out of employees without actually formally recognizing them. They'll tap you on the shoulder and say, "Hey, we want you to do this other work." A lot of times it'll come when things are slow, like your work is slow, and hey, we need you to do this other job at the same time because things are slow here. Maybe you take on this other responsibility to keep you busy. And people, of course, if you're an employee, especially in a time when people are laying off, you're going to do whatever it takes to stay busy and stay valuable. So you're going to start doing that other work. But before you know it, now you own that new work. And it's the compensation doesn't always follow with it. So quiet hiring is generally giving people these job opportunities. I should say work opportunities, not necessarily job opportunity, work opportunities to enrich themselves. And for a company, the advantage for them is that they're not necessarily having to go out and hire somebody actively for this job. They can quiet hire somebody and give them this extra responsibility without actually hiring somebody. So as an employee, you can use it to your advantage. It's kind of the opposite of quiet quitting, right? Quiet quitting is people scaling back their work so that they do what they're paid to do, right? Um, quiet hiring is kind of the opposite of that. It's like kind of the exact reverse of that. It's like giving people more responsibility for the same pay. So if you're an employee, you use it to your advantage. If you wanted to make a career shift, if you've been wanting to skill up and get something on your resume that's been hard to get, use it to your advantage and have those conversations with your boss and try to get the right stuff on your resume so that you become a more marketable person. But you need to also understand where your value is. And if you're somebody that is being asked to quiet quit or quiet hire, be quiet hired, do work outside of your normal work scope, make sure that it's something that's consistent with where you want your career path to be. Because if you suddenly find yourself branded a certain job type because they switched you without you even really realizing it, it could mess up your career path. So you have to be really careful with that, and also know your value. If you're being asked to do work that is outside of your normal and you know that it's paid more on the open market, you need to know your value. And again, act like a free agent, act like a CEO, and say, as a CEO of my career, is this the best thing for me? And if it's not, you need to make the right decisions and decide. You either need to leave the organization and try to find something that's more consistent with your career path, or not. But I do think we're seeing an influx of this. Another thing that I think, as an extension of quiet hiring, that we're seeing is companies will downsize their teams. They'll lay off people, and then a month later, you see the same job posted as a contractor or a part time. That's the same thing. It's an external quiet hire, right? They're quietly like they still need the work. They laid off the expensive person, right? And now they still need the job to be done. So now they're trying to get it done for cheaper. And so they'll hire somebody as a, not a full-time employee, a quiet hire.
Yeah, that's super tricky. So basically, that's what the company's been doing for like for many years already. That's not something new, right?
No, this is not. Most of these like tag phrases, these like buzzwords that you're seeing, and it's like some writer at some publication is trying to get a viral video out of it. I think these concepts have been around for years and years, and they're now just putting labels on them. Like quiet quitting is or career cushioning is another one. It's like they're not new concepts. They've been around forever. People have been doing them, just they haven't had a label to them. So quiet hiring is not a new concept, and companies have been doing this for a long time. It's good that it's getting some attention because now people can actually recognize when it's happening to them, and it can be good and bad for the employee. You have to know which side of the fence you want to be on for that. If it's not taking you closer to your career direction, or it's going to overload you or stress you whenever work returns, then it could be bad for you. But if you're looking to make a career shift, it could be really good to get that experience and potentially a title on your resume that can make you a stronger candidate for future jobs. So it all just depends on how you look at it. Now, if you've got a skill that you don't really ever want to market because you don't want to be found for that on the by a recruiter or some other company, then that's not going to be as valuable. But if it is a valuable skill that you actually enjoyed, then it could be a very good thing. But it is stressful for people who don't want to do the kind of work that they're being asked to do. But it's like you don't really have much of a choice, right? If human resources or your boss comes to you and says, "Hey, we want you to do this other type of work," what are you going to do? Tell them no? How long do you think you're going to have a job for? So it's not really a voluntary thing in that way. Like you do it, or you're probably put on a list at some point, I would imagine. So it can be very stressful and emotionally draining, when you're doing work, especially if your career path is not, you want to go here, but this new job is taking you here. You do this for a couple of years and suddenly you go on the open market. Now recruiters are going to look at you as this thing and not where you want to go. So you have to, again, so being the CEO of your career, you have to say, is this what I want to do? Now it might be a situation where you don't have another option. So yeah, I'm going to take this job because I don't really have a choice. But your choice at that point is to act like a CEO or act like a free agent and say, okay, I'm going to take this job, but I'm now actively updating my resume and I'm skilling up and I'm going to leave the organization because this is not what I want to do. So it becomes you have to become a very purposeful in the decisions that you make, and this idea of corporate loyalty. Well, sure, boss, I'll do whatever you say. I'll do whatever you want me to do, even though it's not in my best interest for my career. But if it's in the best interest of of the company, then I'll do whatever it takes. That's where people tend to get 10 years down the road. They wake up one day realizing that they're way off in some career path that is not at all aligned with what they want to do. And then that company lays them off. And now they're stuck as they've been rebranded as something they don't even like. And they go, I did that for the company, but that's why I got paid in return. And I know it's kind of like a pragmatic way of looking at it, but I think employees need to take ownership of their career and do what's best for them first. And career strategy and career planning should be first and foremost, because you're not going to stay with the same the reality is you're not going to stay with the same organization for 30 plus years. That doesn't happen anymore. Maybe two generations ago, maybe I don't know where you're located, but maybe in certain cultures it might be still a thing, but here in the United States it's not a thing. Like people rarely stay in organizations for longer than, I would say, even probably 5 years is a long time at a company now. Whereas it used to be 30 years at one organization and you were fine. But nowadays it's, we're kind of nomadic. We move from role to role to role. So being a free agent I know it's kind of a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's an important point.
Okay, great. And I have one more question for you. And talking about the jobs of future, what professions will become extinct due to the development of artificial intelligence? And is it still not too late to requalify?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of you can't help it. I don't know if you're familiar with the book, like The Brave New World or 1984. It's kind of scary, like where things are heading in that regard. Where I think one day you're going to walk down the street and see robots, and I don't know how I feel about that. Um, Automation has always been a thing in the industrial since the industrial revolution. So companies have always looked for ways to reduce their reliance on, I hate to use the term like human resources, but it's what it is. It's a human resource. So I think that that's going to continue with this, with the advances in AI recently. I mean, sir, I've seen certainly in like low skill, low skill, high demand jobs like food service. I think there's like a McDonald's here that has gone fully automated. There's not a single human that works there. It's like all robotic. So you go in and you place your order through a computer screen, and a robot basically, it's like a fully automated McDonald's. It's like a pilot they're like trying to do. So I think a lot of those type of jobs where people don't want them, people don't want those kind of jobs in general, will those will probably be automated. I think that you're seeing like truck driving is now starting to be automated. There's some like pilot programs for that, which I don't know how I feel about driving on the highway with a automated truck driving by me. Just don't trust it. I think even like now with like chat GDP is kind of going to be disruptive with like the first thing that comes up to my mind is like writers and, especially for like um, business publications and things like that. It's a pretty interesting tool. I don't know if you've played around with it, but it can be that can be disruptive. Anything that is highly analytical and detail oriented, like numbers driven. I could even see software developing potentially being really affected, where an AI could create really good, clean code. And then maybe instead of having a team of 10 software developers, you now only have a team of one or two who kind of creates the overall and then sets AI on to actually writing the code for it. So, what used to be a potentially very stable, high demand could potentially really get affected by it. And so I think it is a potential threat. I mean, even uh, other number driven like data analyst, like trading, anything in along those lines, like supply chain stuff that can be automated using computer systems where you don't necessarily need a a human. You can tell when inventory is at a certain level, it triggers something, which then triggers an AI to go off and start to do the work and order the right parts they get shipped in. Um, so it will become tricky, and I think that there it will be disruptive to the traditional way of working. And so it then becomes a matter of what can I do in my career to reskill if I'm in a high at risk career type. What can I do to skill now so that I stay in front of it? Now, obviously, I think it's still going to take a while to get all that stuff implemented. But Chat GDP just like came out of nowhere like a couple months ago, and now it's like you can't open up the newspaper without seeing another article about somebody using Chat GDP. I think when I was in school and university, I used to spend hours at the library writing papers, and then you can go into ChatGPT and say ChatGPT, you like write a paper on this subject, and it within 30 seconds you've got your article, and it's like it all checks out. So, what's that going to do for even for in school? Like what's to stop a student from getting all their term papers written in 30 seconds versus what used to take all weekend to do?
What do you think? How soon is gonna happen? I mean, how soon everything's gonna be automated, or at least the main areas of our life?
I would say whatever in the public sphere, whatever we're seeing in the public sphere, we're probably already 20 or 30 years behind what's actually happening behind the scenes. But what we don't see, probably even more than that, honestly. So what they have behind the scenes is probably way more advanced than we all want to probably admit. Um, how soon? I don't know. I think I'm sure you look back 10 years from today and we watch this video 10 years from now, we'll say, oh, yeah, it's going to look a lot different. But I mean, it's not like you're going to wake up tomorrow and your software developing job is going to be obsolete. But you got to believe companies like Amazon and Google are looking at AI for how can they, I mean, if they can replace 50% of their software developers with AI, you don't think that they're going to actively look to do that? I mean, you'd be naive to not think that. It's a huge amount of money for them, and you don't have to deal with people. People, that's it's a lot easier to tell a robot what to do and not have them complain about work hours. And so from an employer's perspective, it is kind of scary, and it does force you to think about what will work look like in the future, and am I safe, and how do I need to change with that in order to make sure that my career skills are still relevant, especially if you're early in your career.
Yeah, so right now we need to think like even faster like we did 10 years ago. We need to think faster how to move forward and not to be replaced with robots.
And it is worth starting to think about, that's and it could be a real threat to certain people's jobs. And I think everybody's job will be affected on some level by AI. I wonder what will happen with recruiting, with the initial like sourcing. I mean, you could easily put a sourcing recruiter, an AI recruiter on something where they're scanning for keywords. And at some level, you still need a creative mind that can interpret and not just go by an algorithm. But a lot of jobs will probably be rendered obsolete at some point, and that's a scary thought. We all see these like movies that come out. Like I've not seen a movie with where AI is prominent, like a futuristic movie that is positive. Every one of them is like a negative, like whether or not they're trying to train us to accept that as a reality. That might be a very real possibility. But I've not seen a positive, so I'm not excited about this. That's not something that gets me excited to think that I'll be interacting with robots everywhere I go. But that is the direction that the movers and the shakers on this planet want to go. Let's not be naive about it.
But I still hope that we can postpone it.
Yeah, and I think there will always be jobs that will need to be, they'll need to be. But if you're in a high risk job, it's not something that I'm gonna like lose sleep tonight over and go, oh gosh, I'm not gonna have a job tomorrow. But I would be thinking like, okay, if I'm starting into my career, do I really want to be in this line of work that has a high likelihood of being rendered obsolete in the future with AI? Maybe I want to approach my career a little differently and start to reskill now. But you should be thinking about it. So again, a CEO is thinking about how can I use AI to my advantage in my business. We should, as career-minded people who are the CEOs of our career, should be saying, what threat does AI have to my career type? And do I need to take steps today to reskill myself or rescope what I'm focusing on so that I become a more marketable person? That should be a conversation you're having with, should be talking to yourself.
Yeah, you should be keeping this in mind. Brian, and could you please resume all of the tips that you've mentioned before in our conversation? So I'll just give me a quick recap of what we spoke about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, we have to know where we are on the employment pendulum, and right now it's buried towards the employer. So, as employees, as the CEOs, as the free agents in our career, we have to take the necessary steps to protect ourselves and make sure that we're doing what's right for us in our careers. And I would urge people to really consider making sure that they know how to make sure that you have the right skills, career skills, because people don't invest in things like, it's like, yeah, I can write a resume. I might revisit my resume once every 5 years when I need it. Or I might send it off to some resume writer and not really truly understand why the resume is written the way it was. Learn how to write your own resume in a way that's actually going to be effective. That's the first thing. I would make sure that you have to know those tools. It's a basic career. It's like in owning a car, you have to know how to put gas in your car and check the tire pressure and do the basic maintenance. Like you're not going to go to a mechanic every time your car tire is low, right? So we have to know how to do the basics in our career, and learning how to write a resume is a career fundamental. Learning how to leverage LinkedIn, especially for professionals, is a career fundamental. It's a fundamental thing. It's not just an optional, like, oh, so that's just for other people. That's a fundamental thing. So building the right networks and leveraging the right tools where recruiters are going to be is a fundamental career thing. So resumes, networking, and then really focusing on asking yourself those hard questions about, am I in the right career path that's the best for me? Is there a threat to my career path through AI? And do I have the right skills? Do I need to start reskilling and making all those proactive steps? But ultimately, at the end of the day, if it's me, I am focusing on building multiple streams of income as well to decouple myself from being completely reliant on an employer to provide all of my life's, all the money that I need to live my life. That's the biggest risk of all, because then you make all of your decisions based off of fear of losing your job.
Yeah, you're right. You're completely right. Thank you very much for coming in. Thank you for your insights. It was really nice talking with you. You really gave such important tips and answered all my questions that I was worried about. And I hope the robots will not tomorrow morning will not will not wake up and we'll see robots all over. Thank you very much, Brian, and have a great day.
Thanks. You too.
Folks, don't forget to like the video and write in a comment your opinion about mass layoffs in the tech industry. See you soon!